Okay, go back. So, good morning to you all, and thank you for being here with us. We are hoping by providing this training prior to the validations commencing, that we'll be able to provide you with a little bit more support and understanding of what the validation process looks like, what will be expected in terms of the documentation that's submitted, um, and the type of communication you can expect to see from us throughout the process. So we're hoping by providing this support ahead of time that it will be of more assistance to you throughout this process. So again, this is the BS 6016 IDB LEA MOE Random Data Validation Eligibility Standard presentation. We are coming to you from the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting Division, and our unit is the Post-Award Compliance Unit. We have a lot of different responsibilities, one of which is doing all the post-award compliance reviews of various grant applications that are federally funded. In addition to that, we're responsible for the BS 6016 random data validations. So with me here this morning is Nellie Nino. She's our team lead in our post-award compliance unit. I am Laura Salazar. I'm the unit manager. So thank you, Nellie, for being here with us this morning. And Nellie will be monitoring that Q&A that is now working, thank goodness. And she, please feel free as we move throughout the training to ask any questions that occur to you. She'll be monitoring that, and we'll pause and make sure that we do our very best to address any questions that you have. There may be questions that you have that require us to do a bit more digging, or, that it may be, for example, if it's a more in-depth question about MOE, it might be a better question for the compliance unit to answer for you, but we'll make sure to capture all of that and to do our very best to answer all the questions that you have. In addition to that, please feel free at any point to take yourself off mute and to ask whatever questions that you have, even if you need to interrupt me in the course of this, please feel free to do that. We welcome you to come off mute, and you don't have to just type in that Q&A. We definitely want to support you this morning and beyond this morning. So the first thing I need to address before we move into the content of our training is our legal disclaimer. And it essentially states that this presentation is based on our most current understanding of the content that we're sharing with you. It is always subject to change, and it does not constitute legal advice. So if you require legal advice, you would want to seek legal counsel. This is our overview for our presentation this morning. We'll touch on what is IDB LEA MOE. Most of you are probably well versed in what that is, but we don't want to take anything for granted, so we'll touch on that. And then also the bulk of the presentation will be an overview of the BS 6016 random data validation process. We'll give you examples, which if you have had time to review the training prior, you hopefully did, and you have seen the examples of where we're looking for the alignment, and then when there's misalignment, what that looks like. We'll also cover common issues that either require amendments and or resubmission of financial records. And then we'll also cover what you can expect prior, during, and after the validation process. We also incorporated a link to an office hour that we've already scheduled for January 13th. So please feel free to go ahead and register for that. But if you do want a more individualized office hour session, maybe you want to just have the folks within your region at an office hour session where you can ask questions and get clarification, or if you want just your LEA to have an office hour session, we will completely support you in that, and you just have to reach out and we can get that all scheduled. But there is now a link in the presentation for just a general office hour that everyone's welcome to attend if you have additional questions after the presentation today and when the process gets started. So what is IDB LEA MOE? Well, IDB LEA MOE, it requires that LEAs receiving IDB funds budget at least the same amount of local or state and local funds for the education of children with disabilities on a year-to-year basis. So whatever you spent last year for the education of children with disabilities, you need to either match that or you need to be exceeding that with the funds that you're expending. My presentation just wants to get ahead of me. It is an IDB LEA MOE 100% fiscal compliance requirement. So an overview of the steps of this validation process, the training, the information gathering. Some of these steps we've already facilitated. One, you know now that you're within that 10% random sample. Step 2 is where we've reached out to you early December, and now you've been invited to this training. In prior years, you know, a training wasn't necessarily facilitated before the validations, but we thought this might be helpful for folks, as I already mentioned in the beginning. So here we are. And then the next step is early January, when you all typically return from the holiday break. You will see an email from our unit, and I'll show you an example of the letter you can expect to receive, basically requesting the documentation, and which comes from your official financial accounting system. And we're looking for that documentation to support the expenditure amount that your LEA has reported on line 2 of the Special Education Consolidated Federal Grant application on the BS 6016 schedule. And that line 2 is the expenditure amount for the current school year.
Question for you.
Yes.
You just said a second ago that the MOE comes from what was spent last year, but we only have the certification of MOE amounts from 22-23. So are we supposed to go off of last year or the one that's the last certification amount?
It would be the last year in which you were in MOE compliance. So if you look at that IDB LEA MOE final compliance review report, you're referencing the second page of that report, which outlines the 4 test method amounts and the last time that your LEA was in MOE compliance and what that amount is. So that's what you would be reporting on line 1A of the BS 6016.
So not last year, just whatever one we have that report for, the most recent year.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. So once the financial records are received, what we'll be doing is we'll be verifying, we'll be looking at the Special Education Consolidated Federal Grant application. We'll be looking at the line 1A and making sure that it lines up with the second page of the most recent IDB LEA MOE Final Compliance Review Report, which is what we were just talking about in that question that was posed. And then we'll also be utilizing those financial records to review the expended amount from those financial records and if it is or is not lining up with line 2 on the special education consolidated federal grant application. And we do recognize that, you know, there's going to be the situation where when you submitted the special education consolidated federal grant application, you were going by the preliminary budget. So that number that's on line 2 might have changed since you submitted the application, and that's okay. But what that will require, and we'll get to this in a moment in more detail, is an amendment so that the amount that's reported on that financial record is in alignment with what's being reported on line 2 on the application. With that financial record, some of the details that we look at, we're looking to make sure that the correct funding codes are in place, the correct PIC codes, the correct school year. We're looking to make sure the LEA's name is on that official financial record. And we're looking, as I just mentioned, to make sure that the total expenditure amount is matching up with what's being reported on line 2 on the special education consolidated federal grant application on that BS 6016 schedule. Now, there are situations where, you know, for whatever allowable exception might have occurred, your line 2 might be less than line 1A, which is the most recent prior year in which you were in MOE compliance. That's when line 3 on that schedule is activated. And that's where you all would be required to indicate an allowable exception as an explanation as to why the amount that's being spent in the current year is less than what was spent in the most recent prior year in which you were in MOE compliance. A general timeline for these validations, again, we'll be commencing in early January when you all return, most of you return from your holiday break, and it will extend through the end of March. And so I just wanted to give you just a general overview of that time frame starting in January, and then we need to have everything finalized and completed by the end of March. Are there any questions so far that we need to address, Nellie, about the overview that I just shared?
No questions yet, Laura.
Okay, thank you. This is an example of the notification letter that you'll receive in early January. It basically just outlines that you are a part of the sample, that we're requesting that source documentation from your official accounting system. And you'll have 5 business days to submit that official accounting system documentation. And we'll begin the process at that point of reviewing that documentation against the BS 6016 on the special education consolidated federal grant application, as well as reviewing the second page of the most recent final compliance review report. So some important aspects of the financial records that you all will be submitting. You'll want to make sure that this absolutely has to be from your official accounting system. And I'll show you some examples in a moment of, you know, documentation that was basically created in a Word document, which isn't acceptable, and then documentation that has come from an official accounting system so that you can see the differences there. But it must come from your official accounting system. So In the event that something's submitted that is not from the official accounting system, we would just reach out to you and ask you to resubmit the documentation. The documentation must indicate the fund codes 199. Sorry, I've got this, or which is the district code. There's 420, which is the charter code, and then 437, which would be a code that might be utilized if you're an SSA member. The documentation must indicate PIC codes, which stands for, which you probably already know this, but it stands for Program Intent Code. It must include 23, 33, or 43. Those are the 3 acceptable PIC codes. It must include the current school year and the name of the LEA. And it must match that line 2 on the BS 6016. And again, I just want to reiterate that, you know, most likely when you submitted the application, you were basing it on the preliminary budget, and that's perfectly fine. It just might mean that the application needs to be amended so that it matches the financial record.
Laura,
Yes.
we have one question. Someone is asking, who will the letter that you had up on the screen be sent to?
It'll be sent to the special education director. It'll be sent to the superintendent. It'll be sent to the 2 contacts on the application itself. So you have your primary and your secondary contacts on the application. So that's another thing. If you know right now that, you know, the contacts on the application are not up to date, that would be another thing that when we go in and potentially amend that application, you'd want to update those contacts to make sure the correct people are being reached out to.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this is an example of when we're saying that we're looking for the alignment between line 1A on the application, which is the most recent prior year in which the LEA was in MOE compliance. We're looking for that to line up with the second page of the IDB LEA MOE Final Compliance Review Report, the most recent one. So you see here in this scenario, this LEA, they utilize their test 2 state and local, and you can see where there's alignment between that and what's being reported on line 1A. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the alignment of one of those 4 test method amounts on the second page of the most recent Final Compliance Review Report with what was reported on line 1A. Now, I do want to speak to why we're utilizing examples from 2023, 2024, because thank you to those of you who, I meant to say this earlier, to those of you who provided feedback on that survey that we sent out. One of the points of feedback was to use validation examples for this current year, but we don't have those yet. What we do have, because we haven't done the validations yet, that's why we're utilizing these examples from 23-24 to show you the financial records and the alignment or misalignment, as the case may be. So in this one, you see here that the grand total is matching up with what the LEA has reported on line 2 as their budget for the current school year. You can also see where fund code 199 is represented and PIC code 23 is present. So we wanted to give you a few reasons why through the validation process, it might lead to an amendment. So one scenario is on the BS 6016 line 1A, the expenditure amount that's reported there for the most recent prior year in which you were in MOE compliance, which is lining up with that second page of the final compliance review report. If those numbers aren't matching up, if one of the 4 test method amounts from that second page is not represented on line 1A, then we'll request that an amendment takes place for the application. If the BS 6016 line 2 does not match the submitted financial record documentation for the total expenditure amount, it depends on the situation. It could be that the documentation you submitted is correct, but the expenditure amount reported on the application is incorrect, in which case you would amend the application. There's also the situation where line 2 on the application on the BS 6016 schedule is actually correct, and the financial record that was submitted needs to be revised. So this could be a scenario where either the application is amended or you have a resubmission of documentation so that you create that alignment in what's being reported. Another reason why this process might lead to an amendment, line 1A and line 2, if the LEA's financial records do not equal the amount expended in the most recent prior year, then that would be a situation where the line 3 is activated and you would need to select an allowable exception. Later on in the presentation here, I linked a link to the MOE compliance handbook, and it has a wealth of information in there. So if you do have questions about allowable exceptions, I highly recommend looking over that, and also on the compliance webpage, which I mean, there's all kinds of trainings and information on their webpage. It's just a wealth of resources there. If you do need more explanation as to what an allowable exception is, and if you know what you should be choosing in the event that you fall into this category where what you're reporting on line 2 is less than what's been reported on line 1A. Another reason would be line 4, which is the assurance of eligibility. And we've seen this a fair amount in our post-award compliance application reviews, where what the LEAs are reporting on line 1A, say for example, an LEA on line 1A is utilizing the test method amount for state and local. But then when they get down to the line 4, assurance of eligibility, they're choosing local only, total or per capita. So there's a misalignment there. So whatever you're reporting for line 1A and line 2, say for example, that's state and local, you would want to make sure that on line 4, you're selecting the correct assurance of eligibility, which would be state and local total or per capita. So that would be another reason why we might need to ask for an amendment, would be that line 4 and making sure everything's aligned. All right, I'm going to pause there, Nellie, if there's something I need to address before I move on to this.
Well, Laura, I addressed a couple of questions. One of them was asking about if you're part of an SSA, will you need the finance reports from the fiscal agent and the LEA? I indicated that if they are the fiscal agent for the SSA, they would need to amend their application for the LEA being validated. But if they are an SSA member, that they will want to coordinate with the fiscal agent to get the documentation submitted. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, that sounds perfect, Nellie. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sure. And then another question was, is it okay if line 2 matches the original budget, but not the revised budget at the time of the report generation? And in parentheses, it says, since budget adoption, we have increased our budget, so our revised budget is now higher than the original budget. I responded letting them know you will want to send the most current budget information, so this may mean that the amount may need to be updated to the most current budget amount in the application.
Yeah, that sounds great, Nellie. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we talked about reasons for amendments. Now, there might also be situations where documentation needs to be resubmitted. And one of the scenarios would be if they, the documentation that's submitted doesn't reflect the correct fund codes or PIC codes. Perhaps there's not the correct school year on there, which happened a few times last validation season. And in that case, we would just ask you for a revised financial record. Another reason we might need to ask for a revised financial record is if what's been submitted has not been generated from your official accounting system. So there was a question brought up last validation season about if, because there were some files that were submitted that were Excel files, and Excel files are perfectly fine. It's not the issue. The issue is that there were some LEAs that submitted an Excel file that they created themselves rather than it being generated from the official accounting system. If the Excel file you're submitting has been generated from the official accounting system, that's perfect. That's completely acceptable. It's just the bottom line is it needs to come from the official accounting system. So if we receive documentation that's clearly not from an official accounting system, then we would just simply reach out to you and ask for you to resubmit documentation that is from the official accounting system. We touched on this earlier with the BS 6016 line 2. Again, it might be a scenario where the documentation that was submitted, that the amount on there is actually correct. And so in which case the application would be amended if line 2 doesn't match up. Another scenario is where the application is correct, line 2 is correct, the current year's expenditure amount, but then the documentation that was submitted is incorrect. So it just depends on the scenario, but this is another one where we have had to have LEAs resubmit documentation because that expenditure amount is not matching line 2 on the application.
Laura, can I throw another question in there for you?
Sure.
Okay, so the last MOE compliance review we received is for school year 22-23. Are we submitting documentation for 22-23 special education application BS 6016? And if so, any discrepancies would require an amendment to the 24-25 special education application, correct? Or are we providing documentation for the 24-25 special education application only?
You are submitting documentation for the current school year, so the 24-25 school year.
So the compliance review, just to clarify a little bit further, the compliance review that's being used is the compliance review for 22-23, the MOE compliance review, but the amount being reported in the application is the amount budgeted for 24-25.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so this is an example of an app, let's see, needed to be revised due to amounts not matching. So you can see here where on line 2, the amount is not matching the financial record that was submitted. So again, this is either a situation where the application is amended or revised documentation is submitted, depending upon your situation. This is an example of where we're looking at that second page of the most recent final compliance review report, and it's not matching up with that line 1 on the application. So this would lead to an amendment of the application to where that line 1 needs to be corrected so that it matches one of the 4 test method amounts that are indicated on the second page of the most recent final compliance review report. So this we touched on earlier, acceptable and unacceptable forms of documentation. This is an example of a document that was submitted that was generated as a Word document, and we were unable to accept it because it's not from an official accounting system. There are no PIC codes present. There are no funding codes present. So this required the LEA to resubmit documentation. This is another example of documentation that was submitted that was generated in a Word document. Again, it's not from an official accounting system. It's not itemized in any way. There are no PIC codes or fund codes present. So this was, again, a situation where we had to request from the LEA that they submitted documentation from their official accounting system. This is an example of documentation that is from an official accounting system. It has the fund code, you can see it right here, fund code 199 present. You have your 23 PIC code here. So we were able to accept this documentation. Of course, I've covered up, the LEA's name and whatnot on this example, but this is an acceptable official record. This is another example of an acceptable official record. You can see right here that there's fund code 199, there's PIC code 23, and it's definitely from an official accounting system. And also you can see here, it's for the correct year. At that point, it was fiscal year 24. Yet another example of an acceptable financial record. It's clearly from an official accounting system. It has the correct fund code. It has the correct PIC codes. So we were able to accept this and move forward with the validation for this LEA. Nellie, I'm going to pause before I start talking about the reports, if there's anything we need to address.
I think we've addressed it all, Laura. Thank you.
Okay. So there are 3 different types of reports that you may be receiving as a part of the validation process. The preliminary report, the only reason you would be in receipt of that is if there was an amendment that was required or a resubmission of a financial record was required. And in that preliminary report, it'll outline for you what the issue is, and we'll provide some supportive resources as well, so that, to help you through that process, but always reach out to us as well as if you have questions. But that preliminary report, if you receive that, it's because there's an issue either that is going to require an amendment or a resubmission of the financial record. There's a final report. So if we, once we start the validation process, we've received your documentation, everything looks good. So you would receive the final report that's basically indicating there are no issues of non-compliance, and you've passed the validation and we consider the matter complete. There's another final report that you would receive. So if you do receive a preliminary report outlining issues that need to be addressed, the follow-up for that, once everything's been completed, would be the final report after we've reviewed that amendment or resubmission of documentation. It'll outline what the issue was that was initially reported to you. And it'll also have a summary report of, the status of that, which most likely will be that it was resolved and that you passed and that the validation is complete. So those are the 3 types of reports that we'll be sending out as a part of our process. These reports will be shared through email, but also our unit utilizes smart sheets for all of our post-award compliance reviews, as well as any validations that we're responsible for. So all the documentation associated with this validation will be uploaded into our federal fiscal compliance and reporting work app as well. So email, but also when we send you out that email, and even prior to that, actually probably when you get that notice letter, I'll also offer you some guidance if you don't currently have access to our work app of how to obtain that access. And I do have a poll in a moment just to kind of get a feel of who currently has access and who doesn't. The work app is an excellent tool for communication and just for you to be able to go in there and reference the status of your validation.
Laura?
Yes.
We had someone ask, since we need to make amendments to align with the latest budget on line 2, can we proceed with those changes now, or should we wait for validation in January?
My only hesitation is that, I mean, it would be wonderful if that was all in alignment by the time we start the validations. My only concern is that if you submit an amendment now, for example, the agency is going to be closed for almost 2 weeks, and you all will also be on holiday for some of that time or most of that time. And my concern is that it would get delayed. And then we would be delayed in our validation process because we'd be waiting for that amendment to be approved before because we need to look at the most current version of your application. So if there's an amendment in process, we would have to put that on hold until the NOGA is awarded, just to make sure that we don't miss anything. So I guess the simple answer to that question is maybe hold off so that nothing is pending when we actually start the validation process in early January.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So office hours, I touched on this a little bit earlier. I did set up a group level one for everyone that's being validated. You're welcome to register for that and show up and ask your questions. But if you want a one-on-one session, or if you want a session that's specific to your region, we are more than happy to facilitate that. We just need to hear from you. You're welcome to email us. The email is present later on in this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to us and we will make time and set up additional office hours if you want that more individual, personalized approach, so you can get real specific to your situation. Also, I would recommend, the PDF version that we sent out of this presentation, that you review that once you start the validation process. And then also initially, I sent out a voiceover version of the training as well. I know that the voiceover versions can sometimes be helpful for people, like more helpful than just looking at a PDF. We are also recording this session today, and it's not going to be instantaneously available. It has to go through our IT's process, but once it has, I will email it out to this group directly, and you can have that as a resource as well. In addition to that, we created a guidance document where it walks you through the steps of how to access the most recent IDB LEA MOE final compliance report in the GFFC system. So that data and collection system. I know some of you are probably new to your role, and maybe you're not even certain, how to go in and access that report. Well, that resource right there, that it's an active link, and it will walk you through how to find that report and how to utilize it for the BS 6016 schedule. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is an active link to the IDB LEA MOE guidance handbook as well.
Laura, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Okay, so one of them, she says, the SSA I'm part of has changed. My email is not the same email that was sent, that this was sent to. So I'm assuming the email that you had sent out before the training. Was that email acquired from Ask Ted? I'm just trying to make sure I get corrected so I get the other emails. I actually received this one from her ESC.
Great question. And yes, it was pulled from Ask Ted. What happens with the list that we're given, or the random sample, the 10% random sample, is our programmers have code that they utilize, and they utilize their link to the Ask Ted system to generate those contacts.
Okay. And then we have another, so this is the grantee. When I have our business manager run a report for 199 PIC codes 23, 33, and 43, the total expenditure amount should meet or exceed line 2 budget for 24, 25, correct?
Well, when you run that report, whatever the expenditure amount is, you just want to make sure that it matches what's on line 2 of the application. And you definitely, I mean, if it either in terms of it matching up with line 1A, which is the most recent prior year in which we have information where the LEAs were in MOE compliance, that line 2, you want it to either be as much as line 1 or exceeding line 1A. If it's less than line 1A, then that's where you get into a situation where the third section of that schedule is activated, and that's where you would need to select an allowable exception.
Okay, and you already mentioned about the recorded presentation. It won't be there immediately, but it will be posted on the PAC website.
Well, what I will probably do is email it out directly to this group because, this is a 10% sample of all LEAs that, that receive this funding. So posting it on our webpage, it's not relevant for for everyone, but it is relevant for this particular group, this 10% sample. So I will be emailing it out to you directly.
I signed up for the training, but didn't receive the presentation via email. Was it not sent to everybody?
It was sent to everybody. I don't know exactly when you registered. The last time I went in there to check for the most current registration list, I think was the day before yesterday or yesterday. I can't remember for certain. And then I sent out the presentation to everyone that had registered beyond like December 5th or something like that. So certainly if if you didn't receive it, please, I would say email us so that I can get it to you directly.
Okay, and someone is asking how to add access to the smart sheet for this app.
Okay, so what I would also say for that is that we have a guidance document on how to obtain access. So I would love it if you could email us directly and I will send you that, because it really that's like a whole nother training. So I think it would be better and make more sense if I could just send you that guidance, and then I can certainly call you, or we could have a Zoom meeting to make sure you gain access to the work app.
Let's see. Are you validating that line 2 of the BS 6016 match the budget at the time of the grant application submission, or that line 2 of the BS 6016 matches the current budget?
It's the most current budget. So that's where you might run into the issue of you're needing to amend the application line 2, because when you submitted the grant application, you were basing that on the preliminary budget. So we want the most current version of the budget, and we'll be matching the most current budget up against that line 2 amount.
This kind of touches on, if we're selected, we'll submit the financial data via the smart sheet, correct? It doesn't have to be.
No,
right?
and I in a moment, I'm gonna put a poll up to see, just to kind of a temperature check for everyone. And one of the questions on there is if you have an interest in submitting documents via the work app as opposed to sending them via email. That was on the survey that I sent out, but I just, that is something that's a very efficient way for us to receive the documentation. So I did want to get a sense of you all's level of interest in that, because if the majority are interested in submitting documentation via the work app, probably what I would do is via that office hour, walk everyone through the steps of how to submit that documentation, especially if you're unfamiliar with how to submit documentation through a work app. Some of you may have done it for the federal program compliance validations that they're running. They're using a lot of work app submissions, but some of you may be completely unfamiliar with how to do that. So we would need to set up another session where I can support you and walk you through that process.
Okay. Couple more. Are only those with line 2 less than line 1 selected? No. In other words, could all of our data be accurate and still be selected? Is there a threshold that put us in this 10% validation?
No, it's completely random. It's
Yes.
completely random. So it's not based upon any of your, any of the information or data on your application currently. It's literally a code that our programmers utilize, and they randomly create a 10% sample of all the LEAs that have submitted special education consolidated federal grant applications. So it's not targeted in that way whatsoever.
And then Is the work app the same as the federal program smart sheet?
Just to give you a little bit of context and background, and you may know this already, whomever's asking that question, but the smart sheets are one thing, right? Where there's a lot of data housed there, and then you can create a dynamic view, which is an individual personalized view, which is then linked into what we call the work app, which makes it visible to the public. So the work app is like a vehicle for you being able to see into some of the data points that are housed in that smart sheet. So the federal fiscal compliance and reporting work app is not the same as Jaime Huerta's federal program compliance work app. They're two separate work apps. But typically, if you have access already to the federal program compliance work apps, you'll have access to ours. If you don't currently have access to those other work apps, then most likely you don't have access to ours. So it's like once you have the keys to the kingdom with access to one, you have access to all of them that are operational and that you're linked up to.
That's it for now, Laura.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to start a poll just to kind of see where we're at based upon what we've covered this morning. And please just take your time filling out the poll, but can you see that, Nellie? I don't see anybody answering
Yes,
it.
it's there in the screen.
Okay, good.
It's there on the screen.
So the first question is, what is your comfort level currently with locating and utilizing the IDB LEA MOE Final Compliance Review Report to complete the BS 6016 schedule? Next question is, do you feel confident with how to read and complete the BS 6016 schedule in terms of line 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Laura,
The
if you're
next-
not seeing the numbers are coming up, so people are responding.
Right.
Okay.
The third question, what is your comfort level with the BS 6016 eligibility standard random data validation process based upon what we've covered so far this morning and the materials you received prior? Would you prefer to submit validation supporting documentation via the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting Division work app? Final question is, do you currently have access to the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting work app? We're at about 64% participation. I'll give it just one more moment and then I'll close it out.
Laura, can I throw a couple of questions at you really quick?
Mm-hmm.
We have an LEA they amended their grant. It's currently in process. Can they go ahead and update or amend line 2 since it's still in process to ensure the amount matches what is currently budgeted in our finance system?
If it's currently processed and in the process and you already submitted it, it would be in grants administration's hands right now. So what that would require is you would probably want to reach out to your negotiator, your assigned negotiator, and request that that be sent back to you so that you can revise line 2 or whatever line 2 on the application as you specified. And I'm sure that they'll be more than happy to return that application to you so that you can amend it. You wouldn't be able to change anything about it once you've submitted it unless they return it to you and it's back in negotiation status. So if that is something you want to pursue, I would reach out to your designated negotiator and request that they return the application to you.
We have some, sorry, we have just a couple more. Do we have time for those?
Sure, I'm going to end this poll and I'm just going to put the results
Okay.
up so people can see. Go ahead, Nellie.
So if we have to make sure line 2, it keeps popping away. If we have to make sure line 2 of the BS 6016 matches our current budget, yet we can't amend until after we submit documentation to you of the current budget, we probably will almost all get an initial finding of noncompliance. Will the notification to the superintendent be worded in such a way that it is clear to the superintendent that we have not done something out of compliance?
Absolutely. I mean, I wanted to make sure, and the message that I was putting out there to you this morning, and also it's stated in writing in here that it's not, a matter of you doing anything wrong. It's just when you submitted that initial application, you were basing it on your preliminary budget. A part of the reasoning for why we shifted the time frame, because previously these validations were completed right after submission of the application, basically. And where that became problematic with the LEAs that we were validating, we got a lot of feedback from the field about either LEAs not having a preliminary budget to submit to us, or it hadn't been approved by their board yet, or they were on a different fiscal calendar. And so their budgets weren't going to be something they could submit to us till a month from the point at which we were asking for a budget. So there were some sticking points for asking for that preliminary budget. LEAs just simply weren't prepared and ready to submit things. So we shifted it to now, to January, so that what you are submitting is a more finalized budget. And as a result, in some cases, that finalized budget may not match what is on line 2, and that is nothing that you have done wrong. It's just the timing. And yes, that will be, clearly communicated that it's not anything that anyone did wrong.
And then one final question, how long does it usually take for grant amendments to be approved? If we were to submit the grant amendment today, would it be approved and processed prior to the validation beginning?
Probably not. I can say with 90% certainty, probably not, because the agency is going to be closed for basically 2 weeks. And sometimes those amendments, tracking through the grants administration system all the way to submission to when the NOGA is awarded, sometimes that can take 3 to 4 weeks. So you could see where that would be problematic if you are submitting something today and then, it gets into their system. It may not even be reviewed this coming week, and then the agency is going to be closed basically the 2 following weeks. And then the beginning of January, that first week of January, is when you're going to receive the letter from us. So it kind of puts you in a bad spot with that pending amendment potentially taking another week or 2 or more to be awarded. So my advice would be to just hold off, and let's get through that holiday. And, on the other side of that, we'll send out the letter. Of course, it is your you know, your decision. If you chose to start the amendment, say this week, that's your choice. But I will, you know, it is going to be in that system for at least 3 to 4 weeks before it gets awarded.
That's all for the questions, Laura.
Okay. Okay. So it looks like almost half of you feel really confident with finding that report, the final compliance review report, and utilizing it. Let's see, about half of you know where to find it, but you're not totally confident on how to utilize it. If you fall into that 44%, I highly recommend utilizing that resource that is still up on the screen right now, that accessing the GFFC and utilizing that report. Please take time to review that. I think it will help you. And then also, please reach out to us if you are still confused about, you know, you might know where to find it, but you're still confused about how to utilize it. We are here for you. You can reach out, you know, via email, and we'll support you through that process. And then about 11% of you are not feeling good about it. So please, I encourage you, that 11%, reach out to us. Also utilize the resources that are embedded in this presentation, and we'll help you to where there's a little bit more clarity and understanding around not only how to find that report, but how to use it. So completing the BS 6016, over half of you are feeling more confident about it. You're about 30% of you are saying that you still need additional guidance. We would love to support you with that. That 30 some people that still feel like they need additional guidance, please reach out to us. And we have some really solid resources that we've created, because, you know, you're not the only ones. There are a lot of LEAs that struggle with this schedule. It's complex, and we understand that. So we do have resources that we can share with you, and we're also happy to meet with you and talk to you about it as a part of this process. And especially the folks that 8% that feels not good about it as well. Let's see. So at this point, about 34% of you feel pretty confident about your understanding of the validation process. And about 59% of you are saying that you're somewhat confident. And about 9% not feeling confident at all. So I would say, you know, definitely reach out to us, and then attend that office hour, utilize the resources that we've provided. But if you need more of a one-on-one or small group session, we want to provide that, because we want to make sure that you feel supported and that you do understand the validation process. So again, please do not hesitate or feel shy about reaching out to us and asking for more of an individualized meeting, so that you can ask your specific questions, or where, you know, just you need that clarification where you're still not understanding. Okay, so I was really curious about this with the work app, and it looks like, you know, about 27% of you probably, you know, would just prefer the email. 42% you're interested in utilizing the work app to submit, and about 38% you just need more information about the work app. So this kind of leads me to feeling like perhaps it would be useful to schedule another session where we speak specifically about the work app, make sure everyone has access, and guide you through that process so you have a better understanding of the capabilities of the work app, and how you would actually go in there and submit documentation. So I will set up an additional session where we can talk through that, and I'll send you out a link if you do have an interest in utilizing the work app to submit documentation, or if you just want to make sure, or just to learn about it, you know, maybe you don't end up submitting your documentation through there, but you want to learn more, or you just want to make sure that you get access to it so that you can, because what the work app provides is your individualized view of, like, say, for example, you know, you're the LEA and you're being validated. So you can see in there the status of that validation, what aspects of the validation have already passed the process, which ones maybe were problematic, dates for when we've started the validation, dates for when we've reached out to people, any documentation or resources associated with the validation will be housed in there. So it's just another communication tool for you to utilize. So I will set that up and I'll send you out a link to register if you're interested. And about 44% of you already have access. That's great. 20% no. And then a lot of you are unsure. So I would just highly recommend, when you get that email about the training that's specific to the work app, that if you, either you don't know if you have access or not, please try and attend. Or if you do have an interest in learning more and submitting documentation via that platform, please attend that session if you're able. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the poll. Thank you so much for contributing to that poll. It's very helpful. Okay. So what we scheduled so far, and again, we are completely open to doing more sessions of office hours that are more individualized, but we do have a general office hour session set up currently for January 13th from 10 to 11. You can register for that office hour. You can attend. You could simply listen in. If you have specific questions, bring them to us. Some of the content we've covered today, we'll share it again just to kind of reiterate, but we also want to get really specific with what you're troubled about, or what your concerns are, or what some of the remaining questions are for you as we work through the process together. And again, any questions, feedback, if you didn't receive the PDF version of this, email the FFCR validations at tea.texas.gov. You can also feel free to email me directly. Again, my name's Laura Salazar, so that would be Laura Salazar at tea.texas.gov. But this is our general mailbox that we're using for all validation email and communication. So we will be checking that. If you have any concerns or need additional information or whatever the case may be, please email us at that email address. And finally, we are at, if you would like to provide us feedback on the presentation this morning, you can scan the QR code, and there are a few questions there for you. There's a link here as well. It's, in some cases it's been problematic for some audience members to utilize the QR code, but so that's why we have the link there as well. Nellie, do we have any questions?
Sorry, I was muted. No, someone did say they didn't receive the January registration link. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that information will be included in the follow-up email after the training.
The January registration link for the office hour?
I'm thinking that's what they meant, but there's no more clarification in the question.
Okay. Well, The link is also in the PDF version that was sent.
Okay.
But if they didn't receive that PDF version, then yeah. But what I will do when we send out that email notification at the beginning of January, I'll also make sure to put the link in there to register for the office hour, just to cover all of our bases and make sure everybody has access to the link.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Laura. And that's it.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your attendance here this morning so much. I know that it's a very busy time of year for everyone. And just please remember that we are here to support you through this validation process. And please reach out to us with any questions that might occur to you as a part of or after this presentation this morning, and also as we start the validation process beginning in January, we are here to support you. So feel free to reach out. And thank you again so much for spending your time with us this morning. I know you're very busy, so we appreciate it.
Do we need to stop the recording, Laura?
I will in just a moment. Hold on, I'm writing
Okay.
myself a note about setting up that workout training.
Okay.
Okay.